Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and on this episode of Cull of the Week, I want to compare the tornadoes and sheep. This wasn't necessarily a combo I was looking to compare, but it was requested by at least 4 different viewers, so I'm running with it anyway. And this is a really hard video to make, because many of their cards do not line up. Additionally, I wasn't sure what the community wanted to cull. Normally, the first faction I name is the one perceived weak, like vampires, werewolves, time travelers, or even the wizards in the next Cull of the Week. But with this pairing, I didn't get a sense as to what was perceived to be weaker, and instead of asking those making the request, I wanted to approach it from a different angle. I believe that factions provide functions, typically support factions. I want to do something, and I need a faction that does that, in this case, movement. The tornadoes are an interesting faction because factions tend to start pure before becoming hybrid models later. Look at the core set. Dinosaurs are pure power, a little bit of destruction, but mostly pure power. The robots are pure swarm. The zombies are pure recursion. Later on, we start to get factions that start to mix and match these concepts. But with movement, it wasn't until tornadoes that we got full movement, skipping over the pirates and bear cavalry. Movement of anyone, not necessarily limited by player. Then the sheep reinvent movement to be focused mostly on your minions. So it's fair to ask 2 questions. Did the tornadoes age poorly, or are the sheep redundant? When you need to pick a faction to fill that movement need, whom do you draft? Just a reminder that factions are considered independently of any specific pairing. Fortunately, titans are not a consideration here. Some cards line up better than others, but the minions line up pretty well. The Dust Devil and Flock are both 2 power and have endgame movement. They do it in different ways. The Flock can move for free when triggered, and that can really help you close a base. But the Dust Devil helps you guarantee presence and can help you win in Phase 3. However, it doesn't help you close a base in Phase 2. I still prefer the Dust Devil because I think it provides more overall value. It also doesn't provide negative value, which the Flock can provide. The Flock can be forced off a base and has a real weakness. They are harder to use, and their primary upside is that their 2 power helps contribute towards the breakpoint. I'd rather take the guaranteed presence, and Dust Devil is much more straightforward to use, so tornadoes take the point. Next, Twister faces off against Black Sheep. Black Sheep has extra power, but a constraint that forces it to move around. This can be strategic, or it can be a handicap. It's common to play a Flock to force Black Sheep to your true target base, and the Flock follows for free movement. Twister can move a minion to its base, but it's capped at power 3. Twister can also move a minion off the base for a stall tactic, but again, it's capped at power 3. The Black Sheep also makes for a great stall tactic, as it takes power off a base to slow it down, but this can also hurt you if an opponent does it intentionally and doesn't need that power. Honestly, I prefer Twister's flexibility and a lack of downside, as Black Sheep has bitten me in the past, even though it has extra power. So tornadoes take the second point, 2-0. The next 2 are easy, as Ram is objectively better than Cyclone. Both can move themselves to another base, but Ram has the optional ability to return a minion there to its owner's hand, which is very useful. Because it's optional, Ram can always do what Cyclone does, but Cyclone can never do what Ram does, and Ram is clearly superior. Point for the sheep, 2-1. For the king minions, once again they are very comparable and separated by a power cap. Monster Tornado can move any player to or from its base as long as the minion is 4 power or less. Little Bo Peep can only move your minions to her base regardless of power. But Little Bo Peep can also keep players from moving minions to or from her base. So what's more important, being able to move opponent minions or preventing your opponents from moving yours? If you put those 2 minions on the same base, Monster Tornado would actually be useless, and I think that's enough to give Little Bo Peep the point. She provides more value as a counter, and there are other ways to move opponents' minions, so the sheep tie the score at 2-2 at the end of the minion phase. Now this is where it gets really hard to compare actions, because the sheep have a cloning sub-theme and the tornadoes have no sub-theme. The few thematic cards that do not involve movement are just general disruption and utility, and do not line up with the sheep at all. So I'll be taking a different approach, but I'll start with an action that does line up one of their double features. Carried Away can move any minion to another base. You Shall Pass can only move your minion, but it is essentially free since you draw a card and play an extra action. And while that's really tempting to be a difference maker, I value uncapped opponent movement too much to pass up on Carried Away. Unlike Monster Tornado, there is no power cap, meaning I can move your large minion and suit it to my purposes, or I can move my large minion for a surprise consolidation. The problem is, I'm not sure what card I would play after You Shall Pass, because it is meant to start a base-breaking chain, and the sheep don't have any good terminal plays. Point for the Tornadoes, 3-2. The other actions that line up well are Whirlwinds and On the Lam. Both are mass movement. Whirlwind can move all of your minions, but only your minions. On the Lam can only move one of your minions, but can also move all the minions of one of your opponents there. This is great in 2-player, but doesn't scale well. I think On the Lam has a higher ceiling because it screams ninja bases, but the floor is somewhat low. It's not a good card for moving your own minions, since all other minions have to follow. It's mandatory. On the Lam requires your opponent to leave a lot of power on the base, which skilled players would avoid. Whirlwinds is the Phase 2 only version of Full Sail, which is still powerful as you can freely rearrange everyone as you see fit. It has the perfect level of granularity instead of any form of obligation. I think its ceiling is slightly lower than On the Lam, but it has a pretty high floor, and I like that. So I'm sticking with my original inclination and give the Tornadoes the point, 4-2. Now the comparisons start to break down. For the second double feature, Trade Winds and To Follow or Not have nothing to do with each other than the fact that both frustrate me incredibly. For some reason, Trade Winds has been really hard for me to play, and I find myself never liking the outcome of swapping places. Usually, I want to add power, not just change the distribution. I don't play this card very much, and it has its use cases, but I just find it so restrictive since I want to use an opponent's power and overtake them. But To Follow or Not is so random late in the game that it makes it impossible to predict its utility. However, it can also be used to target specific cards when there is only one action, circumventing the restriction, and that alone is enough to give the sheep the point, 4-3. Next, we have Ripped Off and Shearing. For many factions, Ripped Off will not do anything. With these types of actions, I prefer to steal an action from another player's minion or move an opposing on-base action to a less desirable target. It has upside, but a low floor. Shearing lets you draw a card every turn, but it costs your action. While Shearing regenerates itself, you have to accept a temporary penalty, and it makes your minion easy to destroy. You won't get Shearing back until the start of your next turn, so there's no guarantee that this will be a card draw engine. And it's not even a good one at that. I suppose there is upside, but if that is how you are using your action every turn, you cannot possibly be competing on base as well. So I prefer Ripped Off, 5-3. For the final bad matchup, I wanted to compare Not in Kansas and In Sheep's Clothing. Neither really sets you up to bring a base this turn. Not in Kansas can take a particularly problematic base out of play, but you don't know what you are getting. It can also be a mass destruction of actions, which is unblockable because the base gets discarded and only the minions are explicitly protected. In Sheep's Clothing is a movement card that you set up in advance, and it doesn't really seem necessary because You Shall Pass gives you an extra action. I think the sheep have enough self-propelled movement to not warrant that, and the upside of Not in Kansas is too great to ignore. Tornadoes get the point, 6-3. For the final three actions, I didn't know what to do because the Tornado specials all accomplish the same goal but in different ways, Phase 3 movement. And I love all of these cards, which are the powerhouse of the Tornado actions. To compare them individually wouldn't work, so I wanted to compare them against a set of the remaining sheep cards, which are all about using opponent strengths against them. Those actions are Hello Dolly, Counting Sheep, and Wood for Sheep. Individually, Hello Dolly probably has the greatest upside because it can copy anything. It cannot necessarily undo these actions, so a minion that is picked up cannot be put back, but Hello Dolly is incredibly powerful timing issues aside. Wood for Sheep is impossible to predict because it is a random card from the hand, which is impossible to manipulate unless you only had one card. And Counting Sheep has its uses, but it requires some effort from your opponent or another faction, as the sheep cannot activate it themselves. But the tornado specials are so clean and elegant and always useful that I collectively value them over the other 3 sheep actions. In fact, I value the tornado specials over any combination of 3 sheep actions. But because Hello Dolly is so strong, I want to split the points 2-1 in favor of tornadoes so the sheep get at least partial credit. This brings the final score to 8-4, and though this comparison was particularly difficult and unique, I am able to draw some conclusions about it. When I first discussed the sheep, even before Crank It Up existed, I felt like they should have had a Titan. It was a feeling rather than anything scientific. I said that when I had only played them once, which was not enough to get a full impression. And now I'm starting to feel even stronger about this when I consider that they aren't my first choice for movement. Their cloning is powerful early game, but too random later on, and their movement is too limited. They have some better minions, but their tornado specials are much more strategy driving. So to answer the 2 questions before, I think their tornadoes have aged well, but the sheep needed a bit more differentiation. Their cloning sub-strategy isn't represented at all in their minions, and their lower minions carry a bit too much risk for me to always trust them. The scales could certainly tip back towards the sheep, but I don't see this being better than an even tie, because I do like quite a few of the tornado cards. So I declare them the winner, and I'm curious to know which faction you prefer as your choice for movement. If you do draft the sheep, is there a specific reason why you are doing so over the tornadoes? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.